morning. Welcome to Powertalk Live. It's a program where we get to the heart of things and we blend both radio, Power 106, and JNN, Jamaican News Network, to give you the best of media exposure for the issues of the day. I'm your host, Ronald Thwaites, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ralston Hyman of Real Business. As I said, we're broadcasting both on radio and television. And as usual, we start off with the bottom line. Ralston, morning.
Morning, Ronnie. How are you doing?
I'm well.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm very glad. In fact, often very glad that I'm a Jamaican.
Yes.
This morning, the BBC had a story of a situation in South Sudan.
Yes.
Where apparently a very good-looking 17-year-old girl
Yes.
had been auctioned to be a bride
Yes.
on Facebook.
Okay.
And the bidders had all come in, and eventually she was sold to a man
Okay.
who paid 570 cows, 10,000 US dollars, and 3 Toyota Land Cruisers for her. Now, there are many things to be grateful for. One is that our culture and our women are not subjected
No.
to that kind of oppression, which is really modern slavery.
Yes, yes, yes.
And then you look at the bride price,
Yes.
which sounded, she's obviously very beautiful.
Precisely,
If
yes.
one can make fun out
Yes.
of a very serious and tragic
Yes,
affair.
yes.
And then there was the other issue, which is the use of social media, which both exposed the issue finally and also caused it to take place in the first instance by
Yes.
providing an advertising platform
Yes.
for such an affair.
Yes.
And we in Jamaica are favorite social media users, but I'm hoping, and from all I've gathered, not being a participant myself often, is that we don't use it for those kinds of discriminatory and oppressive purposes.
Yes. Yes.
What a thing, eh?
Yes, certainly, certainly.
570 cows,
Yeah.
10,000 US dollars, and 3 Toyota Land Cruisers. Yes? And finally, but unfortunately, Facebook didn't take down the posting until the poor girl had been sold.
Yes.
So the human rights lobbyists, thankfully, are now going in to try and relieve her of this oppressive marriage.
Yes.
One hopes that, can you imagine having to lead the 570 cows back to wherever they came from?
On the other hand, though, on the positive side, yesterday we saw Carlos Ghosn, who is the chairman of Nissan. He was removed from his position and charged for underreporting his income. He reported 44 million while he was supposed to have reported 88 million.
That
We'd
is,
like to see the day in Jamaica when these things would happen.
well, let's understand, he was trying to evade tax, was he?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the tax administration
Yes,
this morning in Jamaica was pointing to a conviction that they have achieved in respect of collecting GCT from a business that wasn't registered to charge it.
Yes.
And I suppose it's part of the same tax avoidance. What is the essential difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion?
Well,
Lawyers make a huge chasm and distinction there.
Yes.
If you have enough income and can so arrange its payment
Precisely.
that you are not liable to undue taxation, is that legitimate? Whereas if you are obligated to pay
Right.
and you don't pay, then it's tax evasion.
Precisely.
There's a huge difference.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure many of our people understand that distinction, one. And two, there are far less of our people who are in fact subject to or in a position to exploit
Yes.
that difference.
Right.
Although some people will think me wrong, because they will say that the 40% of the Jamaican economy, which is in the informal sector, remain informal for that purpose entirely.
Yes.
Is that so?
No, I don't believe that that's exclusively the reason. There's the whole thing in relation to, many of them do, but there's a whole thing in relation to bureaucracy and the detective story of getting into the formal system. But as a matter of magnitude, what TJ did this morning approximate nowhere close to Carlos Ghosn.
No.
That's what I'm
I
talking
see.
about.
Yes. Okay.
In terms of magnitude.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Is having an offshore company which you direct all your income, or having different places of business outside of the Jamaican territory, for example, where you book your expenses or you sequester your profits.
Yes.
Is that are there rules in connection with that, or is that just savvy business?
Well, many people would say it's savvy business, but places like the European Union, they are now drawing down on those places, so people are now trying to avoid.
The tax havens of this world
Yes,
are in
avoid
decline.
Yes,
Are they?
Yes, because the European Union is coming down heavily on them. So
And there, we have stopped talking entirely
Yes.
about this offshore banking center
Precisely,
that was
precisely.
in many
it was
minds.
never a viable proposition at the time, because at that time the Europeans and the Americans, they were getting very serious about these things.
You saw that, but
Yes.
Unfortunately we spent a lot of money, and a lot of time
Yeah.
trying to blow life into a corpse.
Something that was dying.
Yes, yes. Well, so we need to learn some lessons, eh? And we need to encourage everybody to meet their obligations, and we need to ask the authorities to be firm, but also to be reasonable when this has to be done. And a broad issue, a bottom line issue for Jamaica is how to bring that 40% of the informal economy, and growing, by the way, into the formal system.
Precisely.
So that you get both the benefits and the responsibilities
Yes.
of that. Yes.
Correct.
Good. Well, no, that all speaks to the virtues of responsibility and prudence.
Yes.
And therefore, one must mention this morning, or ask your view on the incurring of $17 million of taxpayers' money to build a sign in Montego Bay.
Whoa!
Yes, $17 million.
17 million.
Apparently, if you look at the number of letters, Montego Bay or Welcome to Montego Bay, someone has suggested it's almost $1 million per letter.
Yes.
Now, this is a sign which we are told was knocked down by a motor vehicle accident some time ago and is being replaced.
Yes.
Well, of course, we want a sign, Welcome to Montego Bay, in front of the airport.
not
and so on.
$17 million.
But $17 million.
Come on.
As one correspondent of mine said yesterday, in his neck of the woods, $17 million could build 4 houses.
Yes.
For families.
Yes.
Okay? And by the way, Messrs. Tourism Enhancement Fund, who are good friends and helpful in the constituency I represent, could we point out that if the sign was bucked down in a motor vehicle accident, then it is the insurers of that motor vehicle who ought to be paying for it, not the public.
And I'm telling you, the insurance company would never pay $17 million to replace that sign.
Absolutely not.
They would not waste their money like that.
No. But
Madness.
But that is the story of the day. There's a big picture of all of the people of repute in Montego Bay who are breaking ground for this thing. And some would say it is de minimis, that means very small. Well, it isn't, you know.
No.
It betrays a frame of mind, and a frame of mind which affects people who haven't got $1,700, much less $17 million.
That's outrageous.
Yes, and who have the feeling that we are at certain levels careless with expenditure, and also that we're setting a style of opulence when in fact it's only outward pretentiousness, and the majority of people are continuing grave difficulties.
That's not fiscal prudence.
No, $17 million. So have a thought again, per people who are so engaged. Well, the 2 other things that I wanted to discuss, let's introduce them before the break, and then you can expand on them afterwards. First of all, this is the week when in the United States, and the day after Thanksgiving Day, which is being celebrated by them on Thursday, everybody goes on a spending spree. Yes. And I've been noticing in the Jamaican press an encouragement of us to do the same thing.
Yes.
We are inventing Black Friday, as it's called, without Thanksgiving,
yes.
without giving thanks.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Well, no. I gather that, however superficial, the thinking in the United States culture is that having given thanks for the blessings of God,
Yes. It's time to go out and
you
spend.
then go and spread those blessings
Yes, yes.
by spending.
Yes.
Unfortunately, most people will be spending on themselves
Yes.
or their own purposes. But be that as it may, that's the raw thinking.
Right.
In Jamaica, we want the expenditure without the giving of thanks.
Yes.
Or the formal giving of thanks. Is that the right way to do it? I wonder. And secondly, relatedly, I want to ask you, what is the role of consumer spending? you will give me a figure for the U.S. economy, what proportion of its vitality
Yes.
is based upon that. And then one would ask whether the same is true or to what extent it is true in Jamaica.
Yes.
And then, of course, although we are going to welcome Michael Phillips, the opposition spokesman on transport, at 10:30, I'd like for you to remind us of some of the details of your discourse this morning on the gridlock and the difficulty that people are having right now in the corporate area and elsewhere
Yes.
by the so-called strike, is it?
Yes.
Of the taxi men. This is the bottom line on Power 106, JNN and Power 106 combined. Ralston Hammond and I will be back in a moment. Talk Live, we're in the bottom line, Ralston Hammond and myself. Ralston Hammond, what is the significance to the economy of consumer spending, and especially the spree that we normally go on here and abroad between this time of year and a new year?
Okay. Now, in terms of GDP, consumption spending is the largest and most stable component.
The largest and most stable
component.
That's what people buy.
Yes.
Food,
yes.
clothes,
yes.
car,
yes.
Christmas,
thing.
everything.
Yes, right. So in America, that's 70% of GDP. So that's about
70%, sir.
Yeah. So that's about $14 trillion.
And that's distinct from capital spending,
Yeah, man.
distinct from savings, obviously.
That's just
consumer spending. That's cost of living spending.
Yeah.
14
trillion.
High living and low living.
Right. 14 of 20 trillion. In Jamaica, it is 1.6 of 2 trillion. So in Jamaica, consumption spending account for 80% of the economy.
Wow. We are a poorer economy, a
Yes.
smaller economy,
Yes.
obviously,
Right.
and yet we are spending more
On consumption.
on consumption.
Yeah.
Is that predictable? Is that to be expected given our situation?
Well, I mean, the lower the level of income, the higher the propensity to consume, yes? So we need now to move more now to the investment side.
Well, this is it. Investment is. Could I equate that with savings?
Yes.
Yes.
Precisely.
All right. And countries with higher levels of savings / investment
Right.
usually have the capacity
To grow faster. Yes.
and to be more independent
Yes.
of external
Precisely.
thraldom.
Precisely. So that is why we must see more in investments, and your savings are worthless until they are translated to investments. Part of our problem is that the savings are not being translated to investments. A lot of the savings are being used for consumption purposes.
You're going to hurt my head.
Which represent investments in the countries that are sending the goods and services to us.
Savings are worthless until they are translated into investments.
Yes.
Therefore, we want to encourage our Jamaican people and look at our economy broadly. Where else would you hear this on Jamaican media? I ask you. We want to encourage our people, one, to save more.
Yes.
And secondly, to insist that their savings
are invested properly. Yes.
You have told me that if you add up the commercial savings in the commercial banks and the pension funds and the credit unions and everywhere, it's about $1.3 trillion.
No, the commercial banks alone sit on almost $1 trillion in savings.
And
the pension funds, 534 billion in private hands, 117 billion at the NIF.
Yeah.
The credit unions are another 100 billion.
Yeah.
And the securities dealers another 1.5 trillion. So we're looking at $3-4 trillion.
So if we were to use that money, not to prop up government expenditure,
right.
not to, well, some of it is invested abroad for prudential purposes, some of it is mothballed for emergencies.
Yes.
Yes, but if we were to use a more significant portion of that which we have already put down, yes, in order to grow the economy, then the Chinese would have nothing over us.
Precisely. And
nor would the Singapore people.
Right.
So who is holding us back, please?
Ourselves. And prior to 2013.
Hello, you heard what the man said?
Prior
we are holding back ourselves.
Prior
it's not
to
that we are poor.
2013, we could blame government for crowding out the private sector. That is no longer.
Because government was borrowing a whole heap of money.
Government
because
is no longer
they were spending more than they were taking for taxation and grants.
Right.
Now that is no longer the case.
No.
So where the money there?
Private sector using the money at their own whims and fancies.
But do we see the farms developing? Do we see the manufacture, the
we
factories?
See the cars coming. And we see the taxes coming. One of the things that Mr. Newman said this morning is that the ministers
Newman of the Taxi Association.
Yes, but there's no provision for parking in half a tree. That's one of the things that they're demonstrating again. Most cars come in, no place to park.
Yes.
Yes. They're also talking about the badges. They're saying that if you come to work without your badge, the fine is $70,000. They're also saying that the part.
Yeah, okay. I think it says a fine not exceeding $70,000.
Right.
Okay, but even so, that's a
significant
risk.
sum. Right. We're also talking about the owners now being responsible for the tickets given to the drivers under certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
these are things we're going to take up with Mikhail Phillips a little later.
Yes.
But quite frankly, the efforts that I participated in, and everybody else in Parliament, was to try and bring some order and discipline to the public transportation sector. And we could have expected that there was going to be this pushback. But at the same time, it can't go on as it has gone on right now. You know? And therefore, frankly, I want to hear from Mr. Newman, Mr. Barton, and the other leaders. What is it that they are going to do to self-discipline the situation, rather than simply make excuses for sheer disorder? Yes, there's no parking lot in Halfway Tree, but unfortunately, all the roads in Jamaica are now becoming a parking lot.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
So how you liberalize policy in that regard? You bring more cars on the road with no places for them to park?
Well,
that's a policy issue.
Sure. While you have a dollar dribble through the Jamaica Urban Transport Company at the same time, which is growing, that spigot is getting larger and larger.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a kind of chaotic situation.
Okay, but take me back to the savings now. Because if we have $3-4 trillion worth of savings, yes, then if the private sector is using it, but then we should see in addition to the cars, we should see some kind of fruit of this. Is there a massive burst of investment? Do we see the Jamaican savings institutions, our money now, buying up hotels? I see them more divesting.
No, we haven't seen that. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
We haven't seen that. What we're seeing are the cars coming.
So the people who control these monies, we would like to know what proportion of those monies are being used indeed to buy gas and oil and car parts. Yes. And at the same time, we need to know what other sectors are being starved. Our mining sector is not a local sector. It's foreign capital and wholly for foreign workers too, as we're getting to find out. Our manufacturing sector is bawling for appropriate capital. Witness Mr. Siago, Metri Siago. Don't even talk about the farming sector.
Precisely.
Yes? And the availability of it. So how do we expect to grow if we fail to use our own resources already sequestered?
That's a fundamental question. In Latin America and those places, private sector credit account for almost 70% of GDP. In Jamaica, private sector credit is just over 30% of GDP, $600 billion.
That is the borrowings to set up and to operate businesses.
Yeah, $600 billion.
Which is in fact the oxygen, it's a bloodstream of an economy.
Right. And if we were to disaggregate that, a significant portion would represent money for consumption purposes rather than in plant and machinery. So the ratio is already low, and the amount being extended for business itself is low relative to...
And you've broken down on previous occasions for us the amount of that credit which the big companies get, the medium-sized enterprises, and the petty little that they...
11% to the engine of growth, micro, small, and
micro, small. Right. But yet our leaders speak about how vital the sector is.
Precisely.
It's part of every other utterance of the Prime Minister. It's part of the PNP's covenant, and yet somehow the modality, the flow-through, eludes us.
Right. And if we use the biggest oligopolies in the banking sector as a proxy in terms of profits, $15 billion
from fees,
$15 billion from foreign exchange trading, $35 billion from net interest income,
and interest income, most of which would have been devolved for consumption purposes. Yes. So therefore, ordinary people in Jamaica, Ras and Hammond, are sensible, because the only portal that they can get a hold of the savings that their kind has put down is to buy a car and put it on the road.
Right. And if you were to disaggregate the big public and private sector projects taking place in Jamaica, it's either Chinese money or foreign direct investment.
Well, there was a person who, to my knowledge, gained a very substantial settlement in a personal injuries case recently. And they were advised, please put your money in a bank or an investment company and so on, And it was a young woman.
Yeah.
And she was very clear. She said, no, that is not for me. I want to put 3 cars on the road.
See.
Yes?
Yes.
And what she was doing is using capital, which would otherwise have gone into that 3-4 trillion. Yes?
Yes.
And employing it in the best way she knew how.
Yes.
And which it turns out is, as I pointed out, the only available access that most people have by way of a car loan.
Yes.
In this case, she didn't have to borrow.
Right.
But in case of a car loan, to earn something. So you keep swirling it around, but not necessarily producing anything.
Precisely. They're producing things in Japan and the US and those places.
We are
Providing jobs
producing
in
things
those
in
places.
Japan and Europe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Listeners, viewers, what do you think? Is the analysis flawed? If it is, you must call us and tell us, we don't think it is. And therefore, it bursts the bubble of the kind of public relations freakishness that's going on in this country.
Right now, as we speak, the JMA will be having a press conference today about
Jamaica Manufacturers Association.
About getting access to financing for exports and to rehabilitate the manufacturing sector, which is no less than 10% of GDP.
No, less than 10%.
Yes.
Now, the Trinidadians years ago revamped their manufacturing sector and were able to take advantage of Jamaican markets for a long time. Now we have a little bit more fiscal space. We should be doing that. And they should have that 4% money available from the banks, from our savings.
Yes.
In order to be able to do these things.
Right. Metro has been talking about that since he became president.
He has been, but is he getting anywhere?
No, that's the point he's making. We know here the Minister of Transport asking for lower interest rates for persons to buy more cars to facilitate.
No, really, truly. You heard him. He said that?
Yes, we also saw
but
the
that
release.
Is madness.
Only heard it. We saw the release.
That's madness.
Yes.
I missed that one. Maybe I didn't want to see it.
Process. Yeah.
So
that is why the existing operators are saying that they are liberalizing the market, and we don't even have places to park.
Well, we better.
So we're going to park on top of each other.
Let's hear what the opposition, Michael Phillips MP, has to say when we return. This is where we end the bottom line. And as I said, when we come back from the break, the current unrest in the public transport sector will be our focus. MP for Manchester North Western, Michael Phillips, opposition spokesman on transport, will be our guest. Soon come. Thanks for joining us on Power Talk. This is Power 106 FM and JNN, Jamaica News Network. Well, I don't know one member of the population in Jamaica, certainly in the corporate area and in some of the major towns, who isn't affected by what is a continuing protest, some call it a strike, by the private transport operators who have taken objection to the system of administration of their licenses, the penalties of the new Road Traffic Act, and other provisions thereof. So we better get to the bottom of that, and we welcome Michael Phillips, a Member of Parliament for Northwest Manchester and Opposition Spokesman on Transport. Michael, morning.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So, what is your view on the activism of the transport operators? You support them, or you're against them?
Well, after speaking to a couple of the organizations, I think there's some misunderstanding in what was said by a presentation in the House by the Attorney General to what they're saying to me and what the amendments that actually came to us.
What is the complaint?
The understanding that they had or have after her presentation was that when it comes to the ticketing regime, that all when be it that a policeman issues a ticket or by the electronic surveillance, that the owners of the vehicle would be the one who would be ticketed and not the driver. But the amendment that came to us in the House had to do with the electronic surveillance.
Process, yes.
And as you would have heard yesterday, my call was for the minister to at least meet with the concerned parties, which is the public transport sector, and to at least have a discussion with them and explaining to them what it is that they're proposing. The concern we had when it came to the House was that the regulation itself was not being tabled at the same time as the amendments. Seeing that the electronic surveillance is new to the landscape, we basically had a compromise in saying that before the law can come into being, the full regulations that will accompany the act itself should come to the House, because the principal act itself doesn't speak about what are the what ifs. If the owner itself has been ticketed when somebody else is driving the vehicle, what happens after that? Is it that if not paying the tickets, then what are the results of not doing that, and so on? So we want to ensure that we protected the populace with what would come in the regulations. Because what it said in the act was that the only things that would come for affirmation in the House, where the act is where the regulations is concerned, are the sections to do with prosecution, and we're saying, and then the rest is left up to the minister. And we want to be able to.
Everything will come now.
He has agreed that everything will come.
But what is the principle that is to be defended? If I own a car and I give it to somebody else to drive, and there's an accident, the insurance, I'm liable.
Yes.
The person who is hurt is going to sue me, the owner, as well as the driver.
Yeah.
So if I give my car to somebody else to drive and they act irresponsibly, do I bear no responsibility at all?
Well, you are responsible because you allow the person behind the wheel of your vehicle.
Well, this is it. So what is the complaint of the taxi operators and owners? What is the justification for their complaint?
They themselves have some responsibility, because their challenge is that the persons who they employ may not stay with them for any period of time.
Yeah, but I mean,
And my word to them is that they themselves have a responsibility to the passengers that their own vehicles are carrying, to ensure that they have responsible persons behind the wheels of those vehicles.
What I hear is an opposition to a new stricture, which, as you mentioned, was pointed out by your good self, by South St. Andrew member Mark Golding, who saw this as a new level of responsibility in the transport system. But what the operators don't want to do is to curb the slackness on the road, where a driver get a car and do something with it, and he has to earn the money and he has to return the money to the owner. Yes, and the owner effectively bears no responsibility. That cannot continue. That is part of the mayhem and the carnage on the road. Where does the opposition stand, Michael Phillips?
No, and I'm in agreement with what you said. In my conversation with the various groups that I met with yesterday and spoken to today, is that the owners have to bear some responsibility for who it is that they employ, who it is that they put behind the wheel of a vehicle. And just like any other law, if you don't break the law, there's no worry to be ticketed.
On the other hand, it's pretty hard if I hire a driver and that driver goes off on a caper of his own, for me to have to be held responsible while he has gone off.
So how do you balance that?
How do you balance it?
Again, Ronnie, I would have loved to see the regulations that follow follows the act itself, to be able to understand the what ifs after. And that is why we, while participating in the debate, had made that asked for that amendment to be made, that the whole regulations, all of the regulations, come to the House, because I would want to be comforted that we are not treating the owners of the vehicle unfairly at the same time also.
Right. Now, in terms of that regulation, how is that now consistent with the liberalization of the system? Because the liberalization of the system will now encourage the kind of rat race that we see taking place. How do you balance both at the same time?
I don't think the minister has thought that out.
He hasn't,
No.
quite clearly.
He has not.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are two things.
There is a political ploy at work, gentlemen. Come, let's state it clearly. Now, we talk frankly on this program. There's a political ploy at work that if you just Lego the system,
Right.
have enfranchise as many people who can get a job, who have who are pleased with the flexibility of owning a vehicle, who can take advantage of the huge credit, consumer credit as we were talking about earlier, cheap rates to get it. Let them go. That is so popular. It isn't funny.
But that's more chaos.
But it's more chaos.
Yes.
Isn't that what we're facing?
It is. And there are two things that we're going to hold the minister to. One, he said that it is a pilot project, 1,200 new licenses. You have over 6,000 applications.
So you think he's going to turn down any?
He may just go ahead and just give more than the 1,200.
Right.
Yeah. Second, he said the increase in the fees is temporary.
Yeah.
He said it is to cover his administrative costs.
Listen to me. William Pitt said that about the introduction of income
No.
tax.
I know that is. Thank you very much. But as an opposition, as a responsible opposition,
Yeah.
we have to hold him to his word.
Okay.
Huh?
Yeah.
Because as I said to the groupings yesterday, is that they didn't make much noise about the fact that it is being increased.
Yes.
And they themselves have to hold the minister accountable. Huh? We as a loyal opposition will make our voices heard. But those who are affected, I expect to hear from them.
Well, I hope so, but frankly, I think the reaction you're going to get is that come and just do what we have to do. And the consequences will be on the road. We're over 300 fatalities for the year already. We have hundreds of thousands of tickets that aren't collectible. And we have absolute gridlock in any urban center and in many rural areas across the island. And this is a direct consequence upon the lack of a plan for transportation in Jamaica. Is there such a plan? Will there ever be such a plan for Michael Phillips?
Currently, this government has no plan for transportation. Secondly, is that you see where the minister will be putting taxes on the JUTC routes. So obviously there's no plan for the JUTC itself.
Well, let's talk about that one when we come back.
What you find is that because of there's a lack of plan, it's a trial and error. But while that happens, there continues to be chaos. There continues to be no dialogue with the transport sector itself. You have persons who have invested their money in the transport sector, who is willing to come to the table. But this minister and minister before seems to have some adverse effect of just not wanting to sit at the table and look at an overall plan with those who have invested their money and what the government would be coming with in ensuring that we have a proper transport sector.
Before we break, Raston Hammond, do you have any figures or any even intimation as to how much credit is being advanced to buy a car in Jamaica, say over a year, last 2-3 years? Do you have any indication?
January of this year compared to last year, we had the figure somewhere in the region of $200-300 billion.
$200-300 billion
Yes.
has been spent
Yes.
over that period.
Yes.
Sir, you're hearing? You're hearing? And then that, of course, has a knock-on effect on the quantity of oil,
Precisely.
quantity of foreign exchange that we have to
The energy
pay.
bill is 20% higher than last year's.
20% higher than last
as
year.
at the end of August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Running at 20%.
6% of GDP now.
So it seems transport sector is 6%.
of
So,
GDP.
Mr. Phillips, what we have to do then, sir, is to ask of you how you think we're going to go forward in a situation where we are forced to buy more oil, spend more money on spare parts, and on the unbridled importation of vehicles, creating congestion beyond what any road upgrading can possibly assuage. Yes, have a law that is fair to both operators and owners, and at the same time continue. You will tell me how much we have to pay, increasing by the day, to keep a deliberately wounded JUTC going. We are speaking with opposition spokesman on transport, Michael Phillips. He'll get grey hair over this, you know. This is a mess of a system that we are making worse. Power Talk Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Power Talk Live. Talking about one of the most acute, severe issues in Jamaican life. That is the state of the transportation sector. There's a strike of taximen all over the country today. I wonder if it's going to get worse. Opposition spokesman on transport, Michael Phillips, MP, is with us. Ralston?
Yeah, speaking with Edgerton Newman from the National Transport Operators Sustainable Development Services, Michael, they say Portmore is locked down today. They are going to be taking a letter to the Speaker of the House later today. And if they get no result, then this thing will continue. We are in the Christmas season at this particular point in time. We're already seeing the problems in relation to the gridlock on the road. What's your take on this? We need an appropriate public transportation policy if we're going to improve productivity in the country, and that is important if we're going to be able to compete internationally. The fuel bill is now equivalent to our total merchandise export earnings for the first 8 months of this year. What's the plan on the opposition side?
Oh, well, you know, yesterday I said that there's no reason, and the minister's intelligence would have told him that the operators were about to take action.
Right.
There's no reason why the minister could not leave cabinet yesterday, even for an hour, to sit at the table with the operators and discuss the matters at hand.
Right.
As far as I know, he has still not engaged the operators. Huh?
Right.
And hence, they want their voices to be heard. Hence, they have taken action. And I don't see any reason why he cannot meet with them. You know, we have been calling that for the government itself. One, to sit at the table with the operators. Two, to come with a national plan to deal with public transport.
Right.
In doing works on roadways, putting in an additional lane or two, is not going to ease the chaos on the road,
right.
the discipline on the road. The government has a responsibility to the traveling public, not only in the KMTR, but in rural areas also. But let's start with the KMTR with a JUTC.
Right.
The JUTC is rolling out 20% less buses now than they started out the year with.
But then they're saying that the numbers were going up. But
well, as Granny would say, "Mouth make for talk anything."
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're rolling out 20% less. Their fare table is 16% less.
The fare box?
Right.
Fare box.
Oh, well.
16% less.
16% less.
And when that happens, who pays the bill, sir?
Taxpayers.
Hence why it is that they had to go to the government to ask for additional
More money.
resources.
Yes.
Now remember at the beginning when the budget was tabled, it was expected that they would have a loss of about $7 billion.
Right.
With the additional grant funding that they're getting now from the government coffers,
Right.
the losses is expected to be around $10 to $11 billion. Wow. Now,
That's more
I
than
would
0.5%
think
of GDP,
I would think now that seeing what is happening at the JUTC,
Right.
if the minister is incompetent, that at least the cabinet, the prime minister, would at least call the team together, sit down, the minister of finance, and look
Certainly.
and see how it is that we're going to stop throwing good money
After
bad.
that. Precisely.
I don't go any fast in your business, Mr. Phillips, but if I were one of your constituents in Northwest Manchester, I would be so vexed that my taxpayers' dollar, which is needed to pave the roads in Mile Gully and Maidstone and Medina and those places, had to be used to subsidize unnecessarily JUTC
Without
to the
you getting
extent,
any
without
service.
me ever taking a JUTC bus.
Agreed. No, agreed.
Yes, I would
Agreed.
That's bad fiscal policy.
Rural people of Jamaica, you must rise against that kind of waste. They're using your money, yes, unnecessarily. We're not saying that public transportation system may not require some level of subsidy for the elderly
it will
and the
require,
children.
Ronnie.
Yes,
it will require,
okay.
but at least you reduce the hemorrhaging that is taking place.
16% less.
But there has
less
to
buses
be,
than
there
last
has
year.
to be a national plan when it comes to the public transportation.
Precisely.
And all we are asking the minister, come to the country. What is your plan? Your plan cannot be just to open up the system for everybody to
I'm
just...
glad you're going there, because deep in the analysis, if you are saying that the rolling stock is 20% less, the amount of revenues generated from the fare box is 16% less, and you're going to give the JUTC more competition. Basically, what you're saying, you're closing it down.
They're also there. Thank you very much. I've been saying that for months.
Basically, that's what that's the signal you're saying.
All indications is that they're not willing to invest in it.
Right.
They're just going to just keep it going until it closes down. If there's a difference of opinion on that, then let us debate it in Parliament.
Okay,
Let's speak about it.
let's look at the immediate situation, if you will. The public is being severely compromised now.
Yeah.
People going to work who normally take a taxi because the JUTC doesn't run their way or isn't able to get them where they want, are unable, yes?
As quickly as they want.
As quickly as, therefore you're losing hours of productivity.
Precisely.
Does this really matter, Ralston Hammond?
It's very important.
Is the impact of transportation on productivity material?
Studies conducted by the Inter-American Development Bank, which is our largest multilateral partner in terms of lending. You talk about IMF, World Bank, IDB lends us the most money. They have told us that this is one of the most deleterious things in relation to productivity, the congestion on the roads. So if we want to raise our productivity levels, we'll have to deal with this problem.
Mikhail Felix, what do you see happening in the next few days? The operators are threatening to stay out, as you heard from Ralston reporting Mr. Newman, until they get some break.
Well,
what is the PNP saying to its senators on Friday who have to put the last stamp of approval on this law, which has so many objectionable aspects from their point of view?
Ronnie, we can't wait until Friday. As it is now, immediately, there's no reason, and we're calling on the minister to at least sit at the table with the transport operators, hear what their grosses are, and respond to it.
But they met with the Transport Authority yesterday.
The Transport Authority cannot, in this instance.
But they said, the minister said you can't talk to them until the 6th of December.
And that is disrespectful to the operators. We are not only speaking about the operators, we are speaking about the public.
Yeah.
Those who need to be transported, going to exams, going to school, going to work. We heard commuters, one woman saying she left Spanish Town at 4 a.m.
Yes.
And yesterday evening she could not get home, and that was at 7 p.m. Huh? What is the minister saying to the public itself? That he cares nothing about what happens to them?
Will the Road Traffic Act have to undergo further consideration and probably more amendments? I mean, it's already about 15, 16 years in preparation.
Yes,
surely these things would have been canvassed before by those most affected by it. The operators are saying no. Did we drop the catch?
I wouldn't say we did, Ryan, because when we looked at some of there was some 100+ amendments coming from...
Which itself is a travesty.
Right, it is. I remember when it started out there, some of the fines, the fees were very exorbitant. It was on our insistence as an opposition to reduce some of these fees. Yeah. It is in our insistence that the regulations come to the House itself and not leave it to the discretion of the minister and the ministry itself. You know, but as I said to some of the operators yesterday, I would have hoped that they would have gotten more involved when the whole, when it was being debated and at least taking an active role in looking at the legislation themselves. But
they argue that they were not included.
That's
the argument. Positive.
They were included in the first go around when it went to the committee itself.
Yes.
But even after that, they themselves could have looked at what the amendments were and make their points heard.
Ralston Hammond stated earlier that the Minister of Transport, Mr. Montague, is calling for more capital to be made available for the transport sector.
Cheaper money.
Cheaper money. A loan for a motor vehicle is one of the cheapest forms of credit in Jamaica now. He's calling for more than that. What's your position?
I don't think the minister is sleeping well at night. I think he's daydreaming now because he has no plan. He has no idea of how it is that what is coming to the country as a policy to deal with the transport sector. He was the same one who wants to see Boscobel turn into an international airport when there's no
no
agreement
traffic.
with bringing in any flights into the airport itself. I think that they are they're reacting to politics in just trying to get on the side of the operators by saying just free up the system. But I think that we need a more responsible response from the government and the minister himself.
Although not in government, may I close by suggesting that you have a role to play in sitting down with the operators and arranging a system which is fair to all.
Yes.
Yes.
And then let us see what's the public response.
And that's
to
why,
that.
Ronnie, if I were in the minister's shoe, it would not hurt to sit down with the sector and have a useful conversation.
Well, and it seems to me that is a national imperative.
It is.
Thanks for your effort in that regard. Michael Phillips, Member of Parliament for Manchester North West and opposition spokesman on transport. He's been meeting with the transport operators. We have a real crisis on our hands. This can slow down everything at just the wrong time, yes? So let's try and avert it. Let's look positively and invite full dialogue and response from everyone. Powertalk Live will soon come back. Welcome back to Powertalk Live. We're joined by Dr. Canute Thompson, head of the Caribbean Center for Education Planning at the University of the West Indies, and author of a new book. You should look at it carefully so that you can get it. Reflections on Leadership and Governance in Jamaica Towards a Better Society. Canute Thompson, morning.
Morning, Ronnie.
Happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
Good, and congratulations on yet another publication. I'm trying to see if my fingers have run out for the numbers of books that
No,
you...
not yet.
Not yet.
This is the fourth.
But coming. But
Yes.
what led you? You often concentrate in your writing, in your speaking, upon the issue of public leadership.
Yes.
Why? Is this really important? And we leaders merely swept along by the tide of mass opinion? Is it really a craft that is worthy of your scrutiny?
You know, somebody said some time ago that organizations are overmanaged and underled.
Overmanaged and underled.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the distinction is created between leadership and management, as management is about doing the thing right and leadership about doing the right thing.
Okay.
And the criticism is that we have focused so much of our time on trying to figure out the minute things that an organization should be doing, that we lose sight of the larger vision that it should be creating and pursuing. The same is true of a country, that it is said that leadership makes a difference between whether a country progresses or regresses. There are several elements to this, of course. It's not just about the vision that the leader possesses or transmits or seeks to create, but it is the starting point. It was Holy Scripture, which you know very well, Ronnie, that made the assertion, where there's no vision, the people perish.
Right.
So leadership, the purpose of leadership really is to appeal to what one other person has referred to as the better angels in each of us, to appeal to us to strive towards becoming a better society. The manager's role is to work out the details of how that larger vision is implemented. But the leader's responsibility is to articulate and uplift and encourage people to strive towards getting to a better place. And any society that does not have someone who is out there defining some possible destination and articulating how a country, a society can get there, then that country is likely to be caught in the mire of individualism and narrow pursuits that consume us rather than uplift us.
Are we clear in Jamaica as to what is the path of those better angels, the direction in which we think leadership should inspire us? And is that the subject of this book?
In many respects, that's the subject of this book. I think that there is a failure of our leadership generally in our country to articulate that destination. We have had some time in the past where this was articulated. I believe that during the era of the 70s, for all the ills that one might want to associate with the economic policies of the 70s, Michael Manley articulated a vision of a particular kind of society that we want to create. And that society was one in which each person would be enabled and encouraged to raise themselves to a higher level. He made education the centerpiece of his philosophy, and grounded that philosophy in a culture of egalitarianism or equity and equality. So policies that were crafted, whether it was the equal pay for women, the
No bastard,
no day again, the Rent Restriction Act, all of these were intended to support. These are the management elements of seeking to support the creation of a society in which there was, each one had a chance to become a better person and to achieve more.
And that was also accompanied by a visionary foreign policy strategy. We get the impression now that what we have is a kind of get-by strategy.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And I feel that is one of the things that is lacking in our era. I do not sense that our current leaders, by and large, have captured a sense of what is that's possible for Jamaica.
Right.
And having done so, to sell that vision to the rest of us and to inspire us to get there. I believe that it's important that we all enjoy good health and prosperity and so on. But what is the larger destination? What's that higher society that we're seeking to create?
Two things, though.
Yeah.
We can have those visions, and it's important, but for them to be realizable, they have to be grounded in practical economy.
Yes.
And is it not true that in our own history, that has not always been the case? You yourself alluded to that. One, though it is under-discussed, because very often when things are economically prosperous, if you will, we forget the inspiration, the social element. And on the other hand, sometimes we have emphasized individual aspiration without understanding how it's going to be paid for.
Yes.
Now that balance, if there is to be a balance, is a topic I'd love you to address. And secondly, relatedly, is the issue that in the cause of establishing a vision for the society, exercising leadership, yes, very often you make enemies, and that coats the very process and objective itself.
Yes.
I watch from a particular vantage point, and confessedly being a part of it, a situation where we contrive differences at the leadership level, and end up having a quarrel among ourselves and achieving less than we could. Are we the architects of our own misfortune, Dr. Thompson?
Yes. Well, so let me attempt to address those two things you raised. The question of that in the process of striving for, perhaps you might want to call it, our individualized destinations and objectives, we make enemies of ourselves. And the earlier point, I'll come back to that in a minute.
Economics.
Yes.
Economics.
The whole is economics. So I believe that, and in many respects, the two are related. So I think, first of all, we have to recognize, I was saying to a colleague just now, that in the process of seeking to transform an organization and to transform a society, you will not win everyone. And those who support and those who are part of the process will come in at different stages of the journey. But the important thing really is to seek to build consensus or build broad-based support around some core values to which a majority around which they can coalesce, with the understanding that it is always going to be a work in progress to win others. But the area of the competition and the infighting between and among groups can be controlled, can be addressed by recognizing that it is okay for us not to agree on everything. but to seek to isolate and insulate a few things that are so central to who we are that we agree that we would not have contest and unhealthy competition around those things. I come from a church tradition which has as its motto, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, but in all things, charity. So can we affirm that there are some things around which we can have differences of opinion, but at the end of the day, we are governed by an ethic that says, even though we might disagree, we endeavor from the start that regardless of what it is, we're going to show regard for each other and respect the rights of each other to pursue certain things that are they're chosen, while we preserve and insulate and highlight these things that are inescapably the things that will preserve us and advance us collectively.
Yeah, but I mean, how would you respond to someone who says that what we're seeing right now is that there's no overarching principle? We have become what Professor Belloc would call random results of accidental situations.
Yes.
That's the kind of society we're developing at this particular point in time.
Right. Okay. So let me try and link that to Ronnie's previous question about the question of the how do we ground all this in economics. So I think that there has to be a set of policies which seek to promote individual access to those necessary things that will enable people to survive, whether it's access to education, access to credit at a reasonable price, access to work. I expressed deep distress. I traveled down Hagley Park 2 weeks ago and drove through many pit holes and back roads that were which were inevitable because of the craters that were elsewhere. And I wondered whether there was sufficient thought given to how those businesses would survive.
Precisely.
So we agree that new highways and new communication links and new structures and new resources in our cities are necessary. But how do we get there?
Precisely.
And how do we organize ourselves so that the burden of getting there is equitably shared?
Precisely.
So I believe that the problem of accidental positive results and also unintended negative consequences is something that a manager must carefully address. And my argument, which is perhaps the overarching argument of my leadership philosophy, is that somebody is charged with the responsibility of causing us all to believe that we need to get to this location, to this destination. But we can't get there by accident, and we can't get there by any route. Right. There has to be a carefully coordinated route for us to get there, which now involves consultation with students, consultation with the business sector, consultation with commuters, consultation with bus operators in this specific example. So if I were to highlight the two critical elements of your first question, Ronnie, it would be, first of all, the motif that runs through, the theme that runs through. There has to be someone always articulating, going out ahead of us and looking to see what is in that destination, how we get there, and then someone doing the footwork, the difficult, tedious footwork of identifying the people who are being lost along the way, the people whose lives are being demoralized because the policy as it was intended is not being implemented, the people who are unintended collateral damages in the process. That's what the manager does, and that manager is that management process represent the pillars upon which edifice of effective leadership is built.
When we come back from the break, is that leader, what are his or her characteristics? Is it necessarily a political leader? What are some of the international examples, the best practices of leadership in governance that we would want to identify as we strive towards being the best possible people and the best possible both followers and leaders that we can? This is Power Talk Live. We soon come. Back on Power Talk Live with Dr. Canute Thompson. of the lecturer in the School of Education at the university and author of Reflections on Leadership and Governance in Jamaica Towards a Better Society. So what are the characteristics of this virtuous leader, Dr. Canute Thompson? And what sector or sectors can he likely come from? Is he only going to be the Prime Minister or the Governor General or someone of that ilk?
By no means. I think that a society that is going to, a society that's going to flourish and make meaningful progress is a society in which you're going to have leaders emerging from several different sectors. I recall growing up in the 70s when you had authoritative voices from different sectors of society. In academia, you had people like Sridhar Ramphal and Rex Nettleford and other scholars at the University of the West Indies who were compelling and authoritative voices on various issues.
Well, look at our national heroes. 5 out of the 7 were never were not politicians.
Yes.
Yes, in the formal sense.
Indeed.
And yet they've had a tremendous influence. Their example, their lifestyle,
Yes.
Their words.
Yes.
What do you think?
Indeed. And these were people who, in this broader sense, were what you would want to call ordinary men and women who lived among the people.
Yes.
But they were able to exercise such vision and such influence that they were elevated to the top. And I make the point in the book that leadership is not a position, it's a behavior.
Leadership is not a position.
Right.
It's a behavior.
It's a behavior.
Yes.
What do you mean?
So one does not have to be in a position of authority or place at some upper level of an organization's hierarchy to be able to exercise leadership. Leadership is exercised and exercisable when one displays a certain level of what I call moral leadership, moral conviction, when a person is able to positively influence others. Well, granted, I mean, a leader may also negatively influence, but leadership is more about influence rather than about power. As a youngster in the 70s, there were union leaders in various organizations who were more powerful than the CEO,
Precisely.
who could shut down the organization on a single word. And the leadership of the organization would have to look to them to get the work back. All right. So one can exercise leadership by demonstrating to others that they have a sense of what is that larger good, A. B, that they have the interest of the majority of people, not just the underclass masses, but have an interest of the majority at heart, that they have some sense that the responsibility and the power they exercise is shared among a group of them as against being resident in one only. And finally...
Boy, what a key point.
Finally, that they have a commitment to making the leader has a commitment to being a servant of the process and a servant of the people rather than being a god over them.
In your writings, sorry, Rastan, and I believe redolent in your book, there is the insistence on consistency.
Yes.
You for example, take the inaugural speech of Prime Minister Holness and the ideals there, and remind him of them, and compare his behavior to that which he said.
Yes.
Is that a good litmus test for determining the quality of leadership?
It is. I mean, and I've said elsewhere, and I'll begin by making this point, that you make allowance for human frailty. Yes. You make allowance for change circumstances. But a leader is governed largely, in my view, a leader is governed largely by a core set of philosophies. All right. So the details of certain circumstances might change, but your worldview does not change. Your philosophy does not change. How you act in a given situation might be a function of certain peculiar facts of that situation, but your underlying philosophy, which in the case of the Prime Minister, he said it was accountability to the people, all right? That he was taking an oath to Jamaica to do the right thing for Jamaica and to hold his ministers accountable. So you expect that whereas the time frame and the mechanism might vary depending on the facts of the case, you will see ultimately those things being lived out. And so consistency is not to be interpreted as absolute perfection.
Right.
But you can see running through the behavior of the leadership, or the actions of the leadership, behaviors that accord to the core
bloodstream of
values.
principle rather than expediency.
Absolutely.
Ralston?
Yes.
Now, what do you believe has accounted for this transformation of Jamaican society where we do not see again change coming up from the bottom, but the people at the bottom looking up to somebody at the top, whether it be the Prime Minister or some done for change, and this whole thing about expediency, no vision, it's just about material expediency?
Yes. I think there's a sense in which a generation of Jamaicans became tired,
Yes.
gave up on the project of seeking to influence change,
Right.
and left the political space as one space to persons who were there for the short ride and for the election money and for the what they could get, and the generation after them. And I'm talking here in terms of time frame. In the period of the 80s, following the ferment and activism of the 70s, in the period of the 80s, there seemed to have been an calculated attempt to weaken civil society, the union movement,
By political leaders.
by political leaders.
Yeah.
And then so people withdrew from activism.
Right.
The generation after that would not have seen, the youngsters would have been born after it, would not have
Right.
seen anything called activism
Precisely.
among large sectors of society.
Right.
And with the influence of social media and other forms of short-term living, what we now see is a vacating of the space
Right.
by the majority. So the middle class, for example, when you look at the number of people who vote, the majority are people who majority of voters are people who are not in the strictest sense,
Right.
people who are employed. I mean, I speak to many people who are employed and say they don't have an interest in it. Politics can't help them.
Right.
And I say to the people, a stable economy makes a difference to your life. A crime-free society makes a difference to your life. A corrupt-free society makes a difference to your life. So to say that politics can't help you
Yes.
is to view politics, to view life and to view citizenship as merely being about what you can get rather than what you
Exactly.
can give.
Right.
Well, yes. But to go back to another point you made, Ronnie, I want to say that our society benefited, I think, and our progress, not only from political leadership, but from leadership in the church, in academia, and in civil society. I think what has happened is that we have
In the
seeded
media.
leadership. And in the media,
I mean,
there's a
the
name.
influence of
Yes.
people, like varied people,
Yes.
like Peter Abrams,
Peter Abrahams, yes.
Wilmot Perkins,
Yes.
yes, and not to be underplayed at
Not
all.
at all, not at all. And there's a little known name of a guy who had a profound sense of what was taken in Jamaica. C. Roy Reynolds.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you remember the kind of sharpness with which he wrote? And yes.
And also a very important aspect,
Yes.
his devotion to the rural economy and to
Yes.
agriculture.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes, topics which are often less spoken of.
Yes.
So it's what I hear you saying is that there's a wide spectrum open for leadership.
Yes.
Once it has that core of principles of respect for the common good, of a willingness to defend that core of things that we will unite upon. Yes, and again the Moravian Charter, always to act with charity.
Absolutely.
Right.
What's in the
Absolutely.
book? Tell us about it. We want to know when and where it's being
All right.
launched.
So
and-
the book is going to be launched tomorrow, Wednesday, November 21, at 4 p.m. at the university headquarters.
Yes,
The guest speaker, might I share with you, is Mr. Howard Mitchell,
very good.
who is the president of the
Fine-
private
fine
sector
choice.
organization of Jamaica. And we expect to have persons from both sides, if you will, of the political divide, persons from academia, persons from the church and from civil society.
Who did you write it for?
Very good question, Ronnie. this book is written for that civil servant who has reached the place where he or she believes that the time has come to speak out, to exercise the courage to say to his or her minister, no minister, it can't be that way. It's written for the civil servants who would, for example, be associated with that $17 million sign in Montego Bay, who would say to the political directorate, it can't cost that, all right? Yes. And insist on going back to the drawing board and giving a more realistic pricing for that, all right? It's written for the civil servant who actually has the bill of quantities, and who would be willing to leak that if government doesn't want to expose it, so that the public can see that it is not correct. It's written for that teacher who believes that more can be done for students in her school, and who wants to press for improved support. It's written for that police officer who believes that it is not right that
we have a death squad.
We have a death squad, all right? And it's written, of course, for colleagues in academia who want to promote the pursuit of that society in which there's greater equity.
There's a salutary restlessness in this man, isn't there? Yes. What's next after this? What?
The next book, which will be published in the spring of next year, will be on educational leadership. I'm revisiting the whole area of how we build an economy and society grounded in education.
Dr. Kenny Thompson, what a pleasure it will be to study this book and also to look forward to the rest and to be delighted by your writings.
Thank you very much.
On a periodic basis. This is a role of great importance in a society. It's one of self-reflection. It's not navel-gazing, but it is stirring the waters and allowing us to reach for our better selves. Dr. Canute Thompson, Senior Lecturer in the School of Education at the University of the West Indies, author of Reflections on Leadership and Governance in Jamaica Towards a Better Society. Isn't that what we want? Yes, join him tomorrow for the launch and make sure you get a copy of the book. See, I'm showing it to you here. When we come back, we look at Journalism Week and the need for more investigative journalism. The president of the PHA, George Davis, joins us. Welcome back to Power Talk, live on Power 106 FM and JNN Jamaica News Network. We're now joined by the president of the Press Association of Jamaica, George Davis. It's Journalism Week, you know. Mr. President, good day to you, sir.
Good morning, Sir Ronnie. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And Ralston Hyman is with me.
Morning, George.
Morning to you.
Yeah, man, how you doing?
I am well, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Tell us the significance of Journalism Week 2018, George Davis. What is the theme, and what is the aspiration that the Press Association wishes to convey to the people of Jamaica by this observance?
Right. So the theme for the week is zealously guarding press freedom. I can't think of a time when press freedom has not been under threat in some way, some shape, some form. But I think the issue is moving from it's rather chronic at the moment, and we believe it's needful to take steps to ensure that we protect the space that we have had the pleasure of working in over all these years. The thing is this, not often, gentlemen, do journalists get a chance to ask the nation to consider this issue, to take this issue under consideration, because of course our job is to report on what people do, what governments do, what important movers and shakers have to say. We report, we analyze, we write, we do it through the various forms of media. But very rarely does the journalist say, you know what, nation, this is what I think you should be talking about. And so on Monday night, we had our public forum, the first of 3, at the Pegasus Hotel, where we looked at the issue. We asked the question, do you still need traditional news and sports? Because we believe that with the explosion in technology and how social media has taken off, and the fact that every man or woman with an internet connection and a smartphone is now a reporter. What does that do to the traditional sources of news? How does it compromise their work? How does it complement their work? How does it allow news bosses, people who are running organizations providing news, to reach more people, to reach them more quickly, and most importantly, to ensure that the work that they're putting out is accurate, it's factual, it's real, rather than this fake business that seems to be taking over everywhere like a bad vine?
What was the consensus from the forum?
Well, there was no consensus at the forum. You had one young lady from the University of Technology who spoke to me afterwards. She felt as if some of the more experienced folks were bashing millennials. Among our panelists, Cliff Hughes, Nationwide News, Kiran Maharaj was our guest speaker. She is the president of the Media Institute of the Caribbean. We had Gordon Swaby, a 28-year-old young man who runs Edufocal. And we had Judith Buckley, an executive at CVM TV, looking at this issue, and Leighton Levy, of course, looking at the issue of sports. And the perspectives were varied, but I think they all agreed that rather technology does not exist to kill off traditional media, and we will still need traditional media. We will still need truthful reporting, but it's how to balance the need to maintain traditional media as it was while augmenting it and making it better through using technology.
Social media does not normally allow for seriousness and depth of thought of much sort. George Davis?
No, it doesn't, and that's the point that Leighton Levy made in his presentation, saying, look, I can tell you the scores, I can tell you what happened, but I can't analyze it in a Facebook post or in an Instagram video or in a Twitter message or somewhere that's in a Snapchat video. You have to come back to the traditional sources for that analysis. But there is still in the space, the space created by technology, the internet and the Internet of Things, people who are now doing analysis. So yes. I will say, why do I need to listen to Ralston talk about the economy and financial matters? Why do I need to hear Ronnie Thwaites talk about the conscience of the nation? Why do I need to hear the traditional sources analyze things when I can go online and hear a man who has copied an article from the Gleaner, copied an article from the Observer, from one of the news websites, from Nationwide or wherever, and puts his own spin on it with a video and accompanying pictures, and then he gives me an analysis. I am accepting that rather than going to the traditional sources. That is what we find happening increasingly these days, and that's why we're under threat.
Well, it seems to me that you need both, don't you? Or you,
of course,
you have both, and one is not implacably in opposition to the other.
Right.
The thing is this: it's not. But the thing is this: people are increasingly saying, and they're proud of saying, I can't tell when was the last time I took up a newspaper to read the news, or I turned on my TV or turned on the radio, because I don't need to do that. I just follow certain people on Twitter, look at what they are talking about, what they are posting, what they are retweeting, and I get my news that way. I don't have to go to the traditional sources anymore. So you ask yourself as an advertiser, do I now find a way to reach those people who are influencing others and acting then as the de facto news source for so many, rather than spend it with the traditional radio of Power 106, RGR Gleaner Group, Jamaica Observer, Nationwide? And that's the issue that we're trying to sift through during last night's conversation.
So traditional sources also use technology as a mechanism of distribution.
They do use technology as a mechanism of distribution, and this was another point of discussion, because here's the thing. A man will say to you that, look, Mr. Fishhead has a YouTube channel that he posts videos on. He's always on the scene getting pictures from his friends who pass things happening on the road, and they post it there. But guess what? A man will see Mr. Fishhead post his video or post something on social media. Then he'll call or message, Ralston, is this true?
Precisely.
Reverend Ronnie, is this true?
Yes.
So that is where the traditional media entities, the traditional, the bastions then, that is where they come in. But you can't stop someone from having access to ready news, whether the news is true or not. And then some people who are lazy, and then some people who don't have your contacts are going to say, oh, I see it here, it must be true, because if someone puts it online and nobody has challenged it, then it must be true, because if it were untrue, someone would. So that was part of the thing that we were talking about last night.
When are we going to discuss, George Davis, what influence the media has, the mass media has on the Jamaican culture in a deep way, and what its responsibility is towards the objectives, the goals of the nation, maybe encapsulated in 2030 or in any other way. It seems to me that we are, maybe that's not exciting, sensational, attractive of advertising, but it's a task which only the mass media can, in fact, in its various iterations, can undertake.
You know, that's an excellent point you're raising, Sir Ronnie, because I'm thinking about Vision 2030, and I don't see any accommodation or facilitation made for this very, very important discussion. And a part of the reason, when thinking about what should be the theme for the public forum that we're having this year, by the way, we're having one more at NCU today at 2 o'clock and another one at UA West tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Kiran Maharaj, again, we're presenting both times. The thing is this, you have to ask yourself, how is it that the Press Association of Jamaica can influence policymakers to start having a very important conversation about that same impact you just spoke about? And I think we chose this topic because you want to start the conversation somewhere. And we are only at a part of the route, not even at the route, a part of the route, but that's where the conversation needs to go critically. If it is that we're serious about nation building and protecting the traditional pillars of society, if it is that we believe that what we have now, we have the basics of a society that we want to endure in the decades to come.
Which brings me to the question as to what is your strategic vision for the Press Association of Jamaica
Which will
in the
take-
process of national development?
Which we'll take right after the break on Powertalk Live. We're discussing with George Davis, President of the Press Association of Jamaica, the role of the mass media,
Yes.
particularly appropriate in Journalism Week. We soon come. Welcome back to Power Talk Live. We're speaking with the President of the Press Association of Jamaica, George Davis. George Davis, I'm interested in your theme, though, zealously guarding press freedom. Jamaica, we need to celebrate. Jamaica is a leader in press freedom.
Yes, we are at number 6, and people like to say, okay, so where's the United States? And we say, well, they're about 45 in the rankings. And then some people say, well, Jamaica's position, is it real? Because are you really as free as you are given the lack of investigative journalism that happens in Jamaica?
Well, let me ask you, there's nothing preventing anybody in the media in Jamaica for investigating and protesting the spending of $17 million to put a sign outside the airport. There's nothing in Jamaica. You couldn't get away with the Jim Acosta debacle at the White House, and no one would prevent a Jamaican journalist, though they would try, from getting inside the Saudi embassy when Khashoggi was dismembered.
Well, and there you go. So I cite many examples, Sir, including the ones that you have mentioned, as evidence that it is not a false position, although I accept that there are frustrations where journalists operating in Jamaica are concerned. But when I compare it to what happens in many places, you talk about Khashoggi and all of those people, think about Myanmar and the journalists who've been in prison for doing their jobs, for collaborating with police personnel or army personnel who they thought were trying to help people, and in trying to help the army personnel to help people, they found themselves behind bars. Aung San Suu Kyi says nothing. You realize that what we have in Jamaica are champagne problems.
Yes.
So we enjoy a working environment that is very, very, relative to many places, very good, even though it can be better because some of the frustrations, especially with the Access to Information Act and how soon information comes back to us and how the rules are, let me say, tampered with by those who are on the other side who are set to give the information. Those rules need to be respected to the letter. But apart from those, I don't think journalists here have much to complain with based on what, relative to what our colleagues across the world experience.
Okay. Now, George, the PAJ is as old as the political parties which lead Jamaica. What's your strategic vision for the Press Association in the process of national development?
You know, I think that we can make a greater impression as a press constituency if we are in a position, Ralston and Ronnie, to do our jobs better. And it may sound like a grandiose statement about something obvious, but let me break it down for you. too many of us in the vocation, and I say I use the collective because I'm a part of it, we are not trained properly to do the things we are doing, especially in business reporting. That's a significant disappointment for me when I go to press conference and I hear the quality of the questions journalists ask, and I even see some of the reporting that is done coming out of PIOJ, quarterly press briefings, BOJ, you name it, or even an analysis of what the finance minister has said. Investigative journalism, there's also a gap, although it's not so much the skill of the journalists, but the fact that most of them work in newsrooms where they have to be contributing to the daily bulletin. So if you have 3 major newscasts per day, you have to be contributing to that every day, and you can't doing that properly investigate a story, which can take months, years, several weeks to get even one bit of information to lay you on the right path. So I want this administration that I lead to be one that is known, that is defined by how many training opportunities we expose our members to. And look, I know people who say, well, you know, I always hear PJ talking about training. Training can't be enough, and we have already forged some alliances with certain entities, I won't name them yet, but that's certain, who have committed monies to us. And in the new year, after we're done with this Business of Journalism Week, we're going to roll out those activities to say, okay, Ralston, come here and assist us with telling people how to analyze information out of the big yellow book that they table in the house during budget time, that Sir Ronnie knows very well. Or our colleagues in Western Jamaica who often say PAJ is a Kingston club. We're going to expose them to techniques in investigative journalism, how to bring a kernel of information into a full-fledged story, how to do the job better. And I want my administration to be defined by that as the executive that offered the most training opportunities to the greatest number of journalists in the country.
To what extent has politics contaminated the press in Jamaica?
You know, significantly so, you know, because just from my observation, there's nothing that I've seen since taking charge of the post of presidency of the PAJ that has given me any new information. I think that there is, in some respects, an unhealthy relationship between politics and the press. And look, it had to happen because we are so small. Sometimes I think we forget how tiny we are, where everybody knows everybody. Sometimes even that gets in the way of proper investigative journalism. But you went to school with that person, or your children go to school together, or you were friends or colleagues or associates in another area. Then you find that person in politics now, and you are in the media, and they call and they ask for a favor. They ask you to do this, they ask you to do that. On a human level, sometimes these things are difficult to balance. But at another level, you have to ensure that you are professional. The person consuming your work, the listener or the reader, has to have a fair expectation that you are doing your work without the influence of others to slant it in a particular way to represent anything but the truth.
That's very hard if your ownership is in the hands of either political satraps or powerful economic interests.
Well, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And because of that situation that you speak of now, it presents a challenge for some of the media houses who even want to look for funding for the entities. Look, and I say this, it's not a stretched point. The Guardian newspaper in the UK has a model where it invites members, it invites readers to contribute to the paper. That has gone very well. They have 1 million new members who have contributed, an average of £55 to the newspaper. The cash is coming in. But you couldn't do that in Jamaica because of the political links, and then you're saying that the rich men who own the Gleaner and the rich men who are behind the Observer, you want the public to fund them being able to increase their workforces and to pay their staff better and all of that. So everything is wrapped up. It's an onion, all layers attached by the membrane or the veneers that separate the various levels, and that's a difficulty that we have to stare in the face in a country such as ours.
I would like as many of the media houses as possible to be, particularly those with newsrooms, to be listed on the stock exchange, to democratize the ownership and dilute the likelihood of influence in an untoward way. What would you say?
That's not a bad idea, thinking of it just based on how you've mentioned it. I never thought of that before. of junior stock exchange membership. I'm sure you want to start with for the size entities that we are talking about. But
Right.
I think greater, look, independence of action on the part of the media houses and the separation from the political actors who gather up, especially around election campaign time, and attempt to, I'm not saying that they do, attempt to pull strings in newsrooms as they try to seed the clouds for their own reign of victory. I think any idea to hedge against that is welcome.
How does the PAJ plans to help its members to deal with that problem?
Look, the PAJ has to remind members, why are you in the business that you are in? And we believe that the time is coming for a serious conversation with the MAJ, the media bosses, to say, gentlemen and ladies, how do we change or not change, how do we address the issue of funding for your entities, the businesses under your control, so that you are able to pay newsroom staff much better, so that a man or a woman knows that they are to keep on the straight and narrow because you aren't to influence a story because so-and-so MP or cabinet minister is going to give you an envelope with $20,000 at Christmas. That is the reality of the situation, and that's a conversation we look forward to having with our media bosses. How do you ensure that you can pay a little more, give some equity if you can't pay hard cash, so that the person feels, all right, if I'm going to be slaving 14 hours a day for something, it's not just a dead salary I'm collecting, but at the end of the day, I have a stake in this, and I can see value in my association, so I will have an incentive to remain on the straight and narrow, because no one remains on the straight and narrow just because they're honest, gentlemen. There's an incentive to do so, whether the protection of your soul or some other consideration.
I think we support the PAJ's president in this regard.
Yes,
That's very important. Finally, George Davis, I have a motion on the order paper in Parliament asking for a reform of the Access to Information Act. I'm hoping that the Press Association would provide the grist for that debate when it comes up, hopefully in February.
Oh yes, we look forward, and I certainly look forward to playing an active role where that is concerned, Sir Ronnie. So yes, you'll see the support.
Because the information from the state, with all of its strength and control over the resources of the people, has to be particularly transparent, has to be particularly open to in-depth reporting, without obstacles.
Oh yes.
Got you.
That
George Davis, we stand with you, members of the Press Association, and the profile of the Press Association has to always be strong and faithfully independent. Thanks so much for your interview today. George Davis, President of the Press Association of Jamaica. And this is where we end Power Talk Live for today. Special thanks to our guests and to co-host Ralston Hyman, and also to you, our listeners and viewers on Power 106 and JNN, and also our editorial and production teams. Please join us again next time when we get to the heart of things and discuss those issues that affect you and the well-being of our country. Remember too that Power Talk continues on Power 106 after the midday news. Until next time, Ronald Thwaites and Ralston Hyman signing out.
Let not your hearts be troubled. Wipe away your tears and fears. 'Cause I know love will conquer evil. Living in the positive.